Hi, shipmates. We're back. To tide you over until our next full episode, we're dropping a special whiskey-themed mini-episode. Tune in as Gunny shares his whiskey journey and treats us to a live tasting review. Grab your glass and join us for this episode of Shipwrecked, all about whiskey.
Oh, whiskey, you villain, you've been my downfall. You've kicked me, you've cuffed me, but I love you for all. If the ocean were whiskey and I was a duck, I'd dive to the bottom and drown to get drunk. Rye whiskey, rye whiskey, rye whiskey, I cry. If you don't give me rye whiskey, I surely will die.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dom. I'm one of the consultants. Sounds quite good, that, doesn't it? One of the consultants on the Shipwreck Pod. Why do you laugh? I am a consultant.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, sounds really good. Shipwreck Pod is a maritime whiskey pod, but we haven't really been doing any of the whiskey stuff of late. We've been concentrating on the naval kind of side of things. So what we thought was we'd do a little Q&A on whiskey. Not strictly just limited to that. We can ask questions about rum, not tequila. I only had that once. Got me arrested. Singapore. Wrong story. But just an introduction to whiskey, why I enjoy whiskey, some of the nonsense and snobbery around whiskey, and hopefully you might be encouraged to dip your toe into the vat of fine quality spirits.
Lovely. Okay, so why don't you tell us what initially sparked your interest in whiskey, and then how has that continued to grow over time?
So, well, I mean, I've always drunk whiskey, normally bourbon, Jack Daniels and Coke. I mean, back in the 90s, when I was in my wild days, the Navy, sort of a JD and Coke was a standard sort of warm-up drink alongside your pint of Foster's or Stella or, whatever. I had a very good friend who was Scottish. I went up to Scotland a couple of times for Hogmanay, New Year, and his dad was fantastic. A guy called Donald, and we would sit up till sort of 2-3 o'clock in the morning drinking whiskey. So I liked whiskey. His favourite dram was Glenmorangie or a Glenfiddich 12. But it really took a visit. When my wife's friend invited us round for dinner one night, her husband is in the business. He works for an independent bottler. And that's where it all went wrong from the point of the wallet. Because, we had dinner and we had a lot of wine. And then he took me upstairs and he showed me his massive whiskey collection. And he poured me a glass of Auchentoshan Freewood. And he sat me down and he said, "Tell me what you think." And he kind of coaxed all of these things out of me. And that was the start. Because I think I realised then that I had a bit of a knack for it. So I started buying 1 or 2 bottles. And now I've got 60 plus. So that's where it started, and it's a hobby, but it's something that you can really kind of get your teeth into. And of course, where it really took off was the pandemic, because there was nowhere to go and drink. So drinking at home really took off, didn't it? Well, it certainly did in the UK. And because we don't have kids and we've got quite a lot of disposable income, my buying of whiskey really took off as well. And we are where we are now. Plenty in the stash.
Yeah, you should get those bottles. Sure.
Yeah, well, I've counted them up. There's a few grand in there. So there's a couple of things. First of all, there's obviously the monetary kind of value. And also, secondly, if we have a fire in the house, it's probably going to take out the entire close. So it's an awful lot. There's an awful lot of high proof spirit sat in this house.
In your intro, you mentioned rum, tequila. Talk to me about what makes whiskey stand out from those other spirits, both in its production and its overall character.
All right, so they're made differently. So whiskey is made from fermented grain mash, right? So it's barley, corn, rye, and wheat, and it's the character of whiskey is really dependent on what goes on in the barrel, the aging process. It's absolutely essential. You can make the best distillate in the world, but if you stick it in a bad cask, it will destroy it. Now, other spirits like rum can also be aged, or are also aged in casks, but they're not nearly, a rum maker might argue, but they're not quite as dependent on the barrel aging process. Whiskey's far more regulated in terms of how you go through the distillation, the fermentation, and the aging process. So the way to think of it is like vodka. You can make it from grains or potatoes, and it uses multiple distillation, and it's pretty neutral, right? It will have some character. I would say that a really good vodka is very clean, very crisp ethanol, especially if it comes out of a freezer. Rum, obviously made from sugarcane or molasses. You can age rum in different casks. I've got a bottle of Black Tot Solera cask, so it's aged in sherry casks. Gin, which is a spirit, relies very much on botanicals like juniper. So for me, whiskey is about the aging process in oak barrels, and that's what sets it apart. Yeah, rum or tequila, it can be aged, but the effect of the barrels doesn't tend to be as intricate. I don't think. You get far more deep layers from a whiskey that's been aged in a barrel, from fruity to floral to smoky, peaty, sweet, sour, savory, Amani, all that kind of good stuff. And then you've got the geographical significance as well. Each area that produces whiskey will produce very unique whiskies specific to that geographical reason. So then you're getting kind of into the French winemaking kind of theories where terroir, where geographical positions of where the grain is grown in this case will directly impact on the taste that you get in the end result, and that's something the Waterford distillery, the Irish distillery, sadly, they're in trouble at the moment. They really played on the terroir, the significance, microclimates, the soil, elevation of the ground, all that kind of thing. So, that's just my opinion. Yes, I know rum fans will probably roll their eyes and go, whoa, hold on. There's a lot of science to rum as well. And there absolutely is. And I love rum as well. But for me, that's what sets whiskey apart.
Other than rum, would you say that it's like a more finicky spirit than the others?
Finicky in terms of making it, or in terms of enjoying it and being a bit of a...
No, in terms of making it.
No, I don't think so. No, I mean, they're all an art. And, a gin maker is an artist. A brandy maker is an artist. Mm-hmm. If you think about the degree of care and devotion that goes into all these spirits, they are all pieces of art. It's just that, you will see 18, 21, 24-year-old whiskies. You're not going to see 18, 21, 24-year-old rums in abundance. And if you think about it, once it's been distilled, once it's been made, once it's gone into the barrel, once it's been uploaded into the warehouse, people, let's just say for 12 years, people will keep an eye on that. People will test it. People will look after that cask. People will regularly inspect the outside and look for leaks. There's an awful lot of devotion goes into it. So, you can say finicky. I would say good whiskey probably involves a considerably larger amount of long-term dedication, let's say. And that's, that's opposed to a 3, 4, 5-year-old rum. And yes, there are really well-aged rums out there. The Black Tot Anniversary Edition that I had was 900 quid. And I'm a firm believer in anything over 100 quid is a waste of time. All right, cost versus reward. Don't tell me that something worth 800 quid is going to give you a massive improvement in experience over something that's going to be 100 quid. And I was firmly in that sort of camp right up until I had a glass or two of 800-900 quid rum. I mean, I was just sat there rolling my eyes, making all sorts of strange faces. So, yeah, finicky, yeah. More intricate, I don't think so. But you would have to get some distillers on here to find it out with sticks and things.
Yeah, it seems like I think it's almost like the difference between cooking versus baking, where you can like follow a recipe and get yourself a fine cooked meal, but baking is like a chemistry. I feel like it's the same thing, kind of like with whiskey. There's a lot of care that needs to go into it and a lot of science and a lot of dedication.
And a lot of gut feeling. Master distillers, think about a Cooper's, in a Cooperage, and sadly, making barrels now is becoming more and more automated. But if you, Daniel and Rex on Whiskey Tribe, they visited a Cooperage as part of Jameson's. The art in that, the skill that's been passed down generations, and as I say, you can make a phenomenal batch of distillate. If you fuck up the barrel, in 12 years' time, you're going to end up with something that's only going to be good really for cooking. The margins are that tight. And whilst you can kind of see the advantages of mechanization of making casks and things, I think that's really sad. I think there's only one cooperage or two cooperages in the US. I think there's only one in the UK now.
Really?
And that's really sad because the effort and the skill set that's been passed down generations in making these things. I'd love to get into caskology, how the barrel interacts with a distillate, how the different types of wood interact, but it's so nerdy, it's past even my nerd limit.
Well, since we're on the topic, do you want to give us just a little bit of introductory into how the barrel shaped like the final flavor profile?
Okay. How's the barrel important? So the way to look at it is good whiskey. The thing that you pour out into your glass is the result of synergy between the distillate and the barrel and the combination of flavors that comes out of that. So initially we use oak because, well, first of all, it's waterproof, which is always fucking handy if you paint liquid into something because really porous wood, you're going to get a lot of leakage. The other advantages of oak is it allows air to pass. So you will get some evaporation, angel share, and it has lots of flavor compounds in it. So different species of oak and different toasting levels are used. And the level of toasting and charring all influence how the spirit matures, the maturation process. So what's the difference between toasting and charring? Toasting is when we use a slow heat. You maybe set a small fire, and it changes the sugars and the caramels within the wood. If you char, you use a much more high intensity flame. And that concentrates sugars in something called the red layer in the wood. So what happens during aging? Three things. So you get something called subtractive maturation. Right, this is really nerdy. If you want, just fast forward into the tasting of the whiskey that we're going to do. But you get subtractive maturation, which causes a reduction of immaturity in the spirit. Yeah, so the distillate usually will be to a lot of people fairly rough, fairly hefty. Although you can get white dog spirit. I've had Buffalo Trace white dog and pure distillate that's not been in a barrel, and actually it's pretty nice, to be fair. You get additive maturation. This is where the wood gives the spirit kind of color, and it starts to impact on the nose and the palate. And then you get something called interactive maturation. And this is where the wood and the spirit combine, right? And what they do is they mix to create a new character, which neither the wood or the spirit has individually. So the tannins in the wood, they're the things that can really smooth, I hate that word smooth, but they can really smooth out a whiskey. But the problem with tannins is unless you monitor them really closely, they can cause bitterness. But they also contain desirable flavors. If you char a barrel, you can reduce the sulfur content that you're going to get, and that's going to allow other flavors to sort of express themselves. And the problem is charring tends to be more effective than purely just toasting barrels at this. So let's take a first fill ex bourbon cask. So this is a barrel that has come from a US distillery where it's been used to mature bourbon. Then it comes over to Scotland. What are you going to get? Usually you're going to get sweetness, vanilla, and then fudges. All right, these are, for me, these are the pre-prime denominators that you'll get out of a whiskey that is purely done in first fill ex bourbon cask. Then of course you can move it to a finishing cask, or to 2 or to even 3 finishing casks. So let's say you move it to an ex sherry cask. That's going to give you dry fruit, probably some sulfur if a cask was toasted and not charred. So you say, I don't want to get too much into it because it is really complicated and you're really sort of delving into the world of caskology there. But the main thing to take away from it is barrels are key, right? If you get a distillery that doesn't invest in good barrels, they're set up to fail. They're not going to do very well, because no matter how good the stuff coming off the still is, once you chuck it in there, if they're substandard, if they're casks that are going to give bitterness or overly sulfurous, then the stuff that's coming out is not going to be great. It's really not. And the problem for distilleries is barrels are getting so expensive, because you think about it, take a barrel and it's in Jim Beam distillery, right? You're not going to move that as a barrel. You're going to have to break it down first. So you need to break it down. You need to package it. You need to be very careful how you package it, because you don't want it to dry out. You don't want it to take on a bad character. Wrap it. Then you've got to ship it across to the UK. Then you need someone to remake it. Then you may decide that you need to age it a little bit, weather it a little bit more, and then you need to get to use it, and that is going to cost you an awful lot of money. Think how many barrels someone like Macallan or Lefroy or Talisker or Bowmore go through. Good barrels are going to be at a premium. And of course, now we've got all this economic uncertainty coming as well. How's that going to influence the Scottish whiskey business when sales were down something like 20% last year, I think? Something like that already over to the US? Going to be tough times.
This may be a dumb question, but what's like the life span of a barrel? Do they go through like one production and then they retire and then you new barrel, or do they continue to use them over and over and over?
That's a good question. I don't know, to be honest with you. I think you can use them once for, say, like a 12-year. I mean, you could toast it or rechar it, and probably use that again. That's something that some of the whiskey snobs will kind of look down on. But at the end of the day, if you've got a barrel and it's held something for, say, 12, 15 years, you could shave it down some, and then you could maybe toast it or char it and then reuse it. The same as you can actually insert staves into a whiskey barrel. So you can take a whiskey barrel and you can take some staves from a red wine barrel, and instead of transferring it from one barrel to the other, you can just insert the red wine staves in, and then that will have an impact on it. But yeah, I do not know, to be honest with you. As I say, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just an interested heavy drinker.
There you go. All right, let's get into a little bit of the vocabulary. I feel like sometimes it's overwhelming. There's a lot to learn. So let's just do very, very basic things here. What's the difference between a single malt whiskey and a blended whiskey?
All right, so a single malt is 100% malted barley distilled at a single distillery in a pot still. All right, it's got to be aged in oak barrels, and it has to have been aged for a minimum of 3 years. Now, you can create a single malt from whiskey from different casks, right? Because what happens is within different casks, there are different subtleties in flavor and smell. So as long as they come from the same distillery, you can combine different casks, right? Grain whiskey, as opposed to a single malt, which has to be 100% malted barley, single grain can be made from other grains. You can make it in a continuous column still, as opposed to single malt, which has to be in a pot still. And usually a grain whiskey will have more than one type of grain in it. So an easy guide is 100% malted barley and pot distillation, single malt, other grain and continuous column still, various distilleries, grain whiskey, 100% malted barley but continuous column still, single grain. It's really is it that important? It is if you're going to really get into the weeds of how different grains produce different kind of whiskey. But look, the way I would do it, and the way that I've been doing this for years is just think of it as single malt, blended, and grain whiskey. There you go. There's the three that you really need to worry about. If you get beyond that, then you need to go on to various websites and you need to see what the specific differentiation is between them. But you know, it is really, really complicated. It's as complicated as cascology, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's a little bit beyond my my comprehension. Maybe because I'm not.
Yeah, just remember one or more single malts from one or more single grains blended whiskey. Two or more single grains and no single malt is a blended grain whiskey. Two or more single malt and no single grain is a blended malt whiskey. There you go. Simple, really, isn't it?
Do you have a reference of the three?
No. Do you know what? Because I'm more into what comes out of the glass and how it makes me feel, and whether I wake up on the kitchen floor at 2 o'clock in the morning. But the different terminology, you know, yeah, maybe one day I'll get really into it. But in the meantime, does it taste good? Have I got my money's worth?
Yeah, I think that's probably what most people are concerned with.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's move on to now the concept of proof. Just a little introduction to that. What is proof, and then why is it so essential when you're evaluating your whiskey?
Okay, so the strength of whiskey affects color intensity and concentration of cognates. Right, these are the substances produced during fermentation. They're basically they're esters, tannins, and acetone. I sound like I've just pretended not to be nerdy about it, and then I've just rattled all of that off. It's a bit bad. But the thing about these are there are debates about what levels of strength are optimal in whiskey. And I think there's a fairly good rough guide is if it's higher proof, you'll get more intense flavors and aromas, but the ethanol content may well be very challenging. It's going to be more of a fight for you if you're inexperienced to differentiate what's going on in the glass and what's going on the palate. Lower proof whiskey, it'll be softer. It's going to be more nuanced, both in flavor and aroma. But if it's proofed down too much, some of the really important stuff is going to be degraded so badly you're going to lose it. Yeah, 40% whiskeys. I'm not a complete snob. I drink 40% whiskeys. That's a bare minimum. Have I had whiskeys where I thought, God, I wish this was 43, 44, 45%? Yeah, absolutely. I've never had a high proof whiskey where I've gone, this would be better at 40%. Now, the good news is you can do it with water. You can proof down a high proof whiskey with water if that's what you want to do. And hey, it works. Anyone who says real whiskey fans don't put water in whiskey is talking out their ass. Absolutely talking bollocks, right? Because I've been drinking in Glasgow for a number of years, and every single bar and every single working class pub had jugs of water on the bar so people could add water to whiskey. So, you know, this whole snobbery thing about, you know, one doesn't put water in whiskey, fuck off, all right? It's absolute nonsense. Now, the beauty of high proof whiskey is that you get to add water to it, right? So essentially what it does is it puts you in control, and it says, hey, I'm going to kick your ass, right? But get your pipette, get your syringe for the water, not for any other recreational substances, right? And stick water in and see how you go. The trick with it being that you've got to record it down so that you know in future, you know, 3 mil of water to a double works a treat. And And also remember that if you add too much water and you ruin a whiskey, you can't proof it back up. Don't go and add more whiskey to it. That glass is ruined. It's fucked. Just cut your losses. Stick some Pepsi Max in it and crack on. Science of adding water is use bottled water or filtered tap water. Don't just use tap water, right? Because certainly in the UK, it's got various things added to it. You've got fluoride. You may have chlorine in the water where you are. If you've got to, right? If you're absolutely adamant you're not going to use mineral water, right? Oh, I'm not spending £1.50 on a bottle of Buxton. Pour in a glass and let it sit for a day. That's definitely gonna help. Use a straw, a pipette, or even just a teaspoon. And we're talking about proofing down whiskey here, so be very careful. Older whiskey, don't do it. To be honest, I've done it with 21-year-old whiskey, and it massacred it. To be honest with you, it was just a waste of a double. The thing to remember is whiskey contains alcohol molecules. A little bit of science, right? So you got alcohol molecules, you've got water molecules, and you've got flavor compounds. And what happens is when you add water, it changes the alcoholic strength. It alters the makeup of the compounds and molecules relative to each other, and it raises the temperature a very tiny amount. And this makes soluble compounds. So by adding water, what you're probably going to get is previously invisible taste and smell on the dram, because these things are now insoluble and they're more discernible. That's the way to look at it. Adding water, if you do it right and you do it in the right amount, a good term is you open up the whiskey. The trick is remember how much you put in, right? If you've got a bottle of 18-year-old whiskey, what you don't want to do is pour yourself a double one night, all right? Cut a cigar, add a few drops, all right? And it's perfect, pitch perfect. Just what you wanted. Neat. This was a little bit too much. A couple of drops of water, fantastic. I mean, a week later, when you go back, you can't remember how much water you added. So you add 3 drops and it kills it, absolutely massacres it. So run a whiskey log. If you're going to put ice in whiskey, what's wrong with putting ice in whiskey? Another snobbery thing. Put ice in whiskey. But remember, there's going to be a point where that whiskey hits nirvana. It's going to be the pitch perfect. It's going to be nicely chilled, and the water might have proofed it down just sufficiently, and you go, yeah, that's the spot. And then do you know what you do? Take the fucking ice cube out. Because if you leave the ice cube in, it's just going to melt. It's just going to proof the whiskey down even further. And you're going to be left with something that at the bar, you're just going to neck, because it's a bit watery. It's not particularly pleasant, but hey, you're in front of the lads, and therefore you got to knock it. You're not going to push it to one side and say, sorry, I'm not drinking that. It's not very nice anymore. But we'll just quickly cover this. Ordering whiskey in a hotel, right? Or a restaurant, right? We've all been there, been out on the lash, absolutely hammered, been for a great meal, go to a bar, or you go to the hotel bar, and one of the blokes will say, I'll get the whiskies in. Yeah. And you've got your lineups, you've got your Macallans and your Bowmores and your Lefroy's, and there's 21s and 25s and 30s there, and all in their nice bottles. Don't. Seriously, don't. One, you're pissed, right? You've been on the beer and cocktails and probably a few bottles of wine during dinner. I could piss in a glass, right? And the chances are at this stage of the proceedings, you ain't going to know what a decent whiskey is. Secondly, you do not know how long that bottle has been up on that optic, right? Could have been there years, and it might not have been properly sealed. So you might not be getting the best experience. And if you're not going to get the best experience and you're 3 sheets to the wind, why would you see your mate off who's offering to buy you a 35, 40 quid single whiskey? Are you going to sit there swaying, cross-eyed, barely able to speak coherently, sniff it and go, oh, yes, definitely, prancing ponies on a dew-filled meadow on the side of a mountain in spring in Japan? You're not, are you? You're going to take a sip and then you're just going to be talking rubbish to your mate. Go for Jameson's, go for a Buffalo Trace, go for a Shackleton. Just go for something that's £5 a glass. Seriously, don't rip your mate off, right? And don't put on this act where you sit there with a 30 30-year-old glass of whiskey, when you can't even stand up and you can't even say your own name, and then pretend that you know what you're doing with that whiskey. I don't. I would look up at the rack and I would go, yeah, bullet. There you go, bullet rye. That'll do me. Fine. Well, you're supposed to be a whiskey drinker, mate. I'm hammered. Well, giving me a Macallan's absolute waste of time. There. So a fast tip for you. And you do see them. You see them, especially in really expensive hotels and restaurants, and they're lining up really good whiskey. Utter waste of time. Fuck it, just Smirnoff and Coke. That would be.
And you could have it and you could think that you hate it because maybe it doesn't mix well with whatever else has been tested that night, and then you've ruined your chance at something that could be rather pleasant.
Yeah, because a really good whiskey is about the smell and the flavor and the experience. And are you going to get out when you're belching, when you had the fish surprise for Maine? It could be anything in that glass. You just won't know. But unfortunately, whiskey's like a lot of things. It's like cigars. It's like cars. It's like clothes. There's a certain kudos, a certain reputational thing involved. And someone might order a glass of something. You'll say, "Oh, all right. Well, why do you like that?" I don't know. I just like it. Well, that thing that you just like costs 40 quid, and I could have had 4 Shackletons for that, mate. but it looks good for them to be ordering it. The same as a flash car, or Jean Paul Gaultier or whatever. Things are worth what someone is prepared to pay for them. They're not necessarily worth their actual physical value. And that's something I'd always be aware with whiskey. Do your research, because all the glitters is not gold in the whiskey world, as with all consumer products. And the things that you would expect to be fantastic are frequently not. And the stuff that you've never heard of is going to give you value for money.
While we are kind of on this topic, do you have any recommendations for pairing whiskeys, like with food or other drinks or cigars?
So what would I... All right, if you've got a sweet tooth, get a wheat cracker, put soft cow's cheese on it, and then grate Toblerone or a good dark chocolate over it, and then have that with Bunnahabhain 12. If you just like cheese in general, Deanston 12, Arran 10, because they're both, they're not overpowering, so they're not going to dominate the cheese. Unless it's a really strong sort of blue cheese. But they're both really good pairings. To have with dessert, Cutty Sark Prohibition. It's an absolute fucking steal. This is still going for 25 quid. It's 50% proof. It's a phenomenal whiskey, an absolute steal. And you can get it in the UK really cheap. And despite being 50%, it's pretty sippable. I usually don't have it with water at all. It's neat, but it goes great with chocolate sponge, or like a hot chocolate pudding, something like that. Peated whiskey, peated whiskey for me. If we're going to put it in anything, hot chocolate. God, that works. Really good quality hot chocolate with milk, and stick a bit of Lafroy 10 in there. Spot on. Absolutely fantastic, especially if you've got a cold. And then for cigars, yeah, the best experience I've had with cigars is actually rum. The black top. Failing that, the Edredor 10, and probably the Dalmore 12. I think they're two of the best whiskies I've had with cigars. They've stood up to Maduro cigars really well. Put it that way. Dalmore's a bit of a funny choice for me, because I tend to steer away from whiskies that are chill filtered, and I steer away from whiskies that have got added color. Dalmore has been chill filtered and added color, within an inch of its life. But I've got to say, it goes really well with a cigar. But it's all up to personal choice, and cigars are the same as whiskey, they're very, it's all very subjective, and you have to shop carefully. I mean, I bought 5 cigars. One of my favorite brands is Gurkha. and I bought a 5 pack of Grand Reserve, which is are supposed to be done in cognac. And I had one on Friday night. Fucking dreadful. I tell you what, it was horrific. I couldn't even finish it. I got halfway through, and this thing had stripped the inner lining from my throat. My nose was on fire. I had to open the back door. I couldn't taste any cognac on it. And I've had to write back and say, look, I'm going to be sending you these back. So you know, the same with whiskey. You can make really, really bad choices. Just research, research, research. But when it comes to whiskey reviews, be careful, because one thing you do notice, if you keep up to date, is how much copy and paste goes on. Some whiskey reviewers will get free samples, so often they seem quite loath, to be honest, in their reviews. Some are definitely cutting and pasting and then just, you know, rearranging odd letters here. I've bought some whiskies, and I've looked at some of the more reputable, supposedly, reviewers, and I've wondered if they've been drinking the same thing as me. Absolutely dire. I mean, I've gone to another review and another review, and they're pretty much carbon copies. So, you know, I always use Ralphie. Ralphie's never seen me wrong. Whiskey Vaults, Daniel Whittington, who's down in Austin. He's done him and Rex have done some absolutely astounding reviews over the years. Neither of them really has led me wrong, and I'm quite sort of pleased with the fact that it's not often I buy a pub. To be honest, I've bought a few. In a moment of madness, I bought a bottle of Lafroig Select, and then I read some of the reviews after. That's going to be just for hot chocolate, I think. And I've bought a bottle, or rather, no, I had a bottle of a Knock 18 bought me, which I've opened again tonight. And the first review was, what is this? Did not get along with it. So tonight we're going to do a live fast re-review and see if 3 months open has changed it at all.
Do you think, because I think there's been a couple times, or at least one time that I know of, that you got something thinking it would be one thing, tried it, and realized that it was a different thing. And so I'm wondering, how often do you get just a fluke, like a bad batch? And is it worth, if you don't like something, do you think it's worth trying it again?
Yeah, it can happen. Bunnahabhain had a bit of a problem with cask variation. So Bunnahabhain was a whiskey that I bought, you know, right at the start. I think we had 2 bottles of it. Both absolutely loved it. Bought a third bottle, opened it up, poured it. I think it was Christmas Eve, and we're both looking at each other and going, "The fuck is this? What is going on here?" And it was just not right. It just wasn't right. Put the cork back in it, and then let it sit for 3 months, and it was good as gold. Back to how a Bunnahabhain 12 should be. So cask variation, sometimes you can fix it just by letting the whiskey settle down for a few months, a few weeks, or even a few months. Have I bought one and never gone back to it? Glasgow 1770, which is another one that John, my mate who works in the business, so he introduced me to Glasgow 1770. So had their baseline model, great. I bought the peated version. It's only 3 years old, fantastic. Bought a bottle for someone. I was so impressed. They loved it. Had a glass of the triple distilled round John's one afternoon. Loved it. Bought a bottle, Pepsi Max. Absolutely horrific. Just was not nice at all. So what I did is I sent a sample off to someone, and I said, look, can you test this? Because, you know, it must be me. You know, because this distillery's got a reputation for excellence. And he came back and he went, yeah, something wrong there, mate. Something not right. So that went into Coke. Will I go back to them? I don't know. That cost me a lot of money. I think that was 50 quid. And it wasn't fixed by being left in the bottle. I tried it repeatedly. I wrote 3 reviews of it. I went through the reviews, and I came to the conclusion that was just awful. It was just not for me. But then, so well, you can't, these things happen at distilleries, and you shouldn't, you know, just ignore a distillery because of one bad experience. But the counter argument to that is it's 50 quid, and as we're entering what's going to be an extremely tough time for a lot of people, people don't have 50 quid to blow on a bad bottle. Worse still, it's going to put them off whiskey entirely. And they're just going to go for their, generic Johnny Walkers and co-op own brand and stuff like that. So, yeah, as I say, I've been quite lucky. It's very rare I buy a pup, really rare. And even if I buy something and it's just on offer, just for 20 quid, maybe down from 30 quid, and it hasn't got a great reputation, I'll buy it and then I'll give it a fair go. I'll give it a go. I mean, I quite like Johnny Walker Black, to be fair, which has had some awful write-ups. Johnny Walker Black label, yes, why? If you're just knocking around in the afternoon, especially chilled out in the garden, nice sunny day. Yes, it was fine, but I have my favourites. Put it that way, and I'll just keep going back to this.
All right. Do you want to now get into your whiskey review? And while you do that, if you've ever read his notes, Gunny notes, you'll know that it's split up between nose and mouth. And so while you're doing this review, do you want to just kind of focus in on those techniques and how do you find the flavor profile? What's the importance of the nose, all of that? Give us the rundown.
Okay, so look, if you're going to get really nerdy into it, there's a couple of things that you need to do. So first of all, don't do a whiskey tasting if you're in a bad mood. Right? We've all had days at work or something's happened at home or something. Mood will affect how you perceive a whiskey, right? So you've got to be in a good mood to do it. I know, man, it's really difficult if you're married, but just maybe they've gone away for a weekend or something, and then you're just naturally going to be on a high. But there you go. Don't have any scented candles going, obviously. Right? Don't smash a chicken tikka masala, a garlic naan, and a chili rice before you do this, because your taste buds are going to be shot. You're going to be wasting your time. Notebook, pen, right? Just whatever comes into your head, note it down. Right? You're not going to be wrong because whiskey is subjective. If you detect wet paper or coffee beans or something, right? You're not broken. You're not in a mess. It's just that's how you're interpreting all these compounds, all these enzymes, all these cognitors. All these things are coming together, and they're not. If I say I can smell a barbecue in a wood, which is quite common for me in peated whiskey, that's not because there's barbecued meat in the whiskey. Right? It's just that everything's coming together and the receptors are triggered in my head. And I'm going, oh, I know that reminds me of this. It just so happens that a lot of people will have that same common kind of trigger. So if we take this bottle of a knock, 18 years old, it's about 100 quid in the UK if you shop around. Non-chill filled, no added colour, 46%. Right, so it's ticking all the boxes. It's from Not Do Distillery. First fill bourbon and then Spanish oak ex-sherry casks. I think Oloroso. That's my personal opinion. Big favourite of Ralphie's this. He loves this. He loves the 12, which is probably going for about 30, 35 quid. I've jumped the 12, which was a bit silly. And the reason it was a bit silly is because this is what you call a very old school malt. East side, Space side. Supposedly one really for the whiskey nerds, and oddly enough, it's supposed to be slightly peated, which I didn't get that at all. The thing about an oak is it's off the radar, and therefore reviews tend to be a little bit thinner on the ground. Just be aware that if you watch a few videos about whiskey and then you read a few articles about whiskey, that's going to impact on how you think. I used to do it. I was guilty as the next man over it. You know, I would sit and I'd watch a Ralphie review of a Bunnahabhain 12 and I'd find myself kind of nodding. The trick is to actually do the notes and then watch a review and then see how that ties in. So last time, and this was about 3 months ago, what did we get? So on the nose, we had immediate malt funk. So very malty, very grainy. Reminds me of Bunnahabhain 12. Lots of vanilla, but also lots of part-baked bread. Sherry is there, but quite restrained. Fairly sweet. Really reminds me of Bunnahabhain 12. Christmas cake, rich. Dark cake, fruit cake. Some white pepper. That seems to be something that I get a lot at the moment for some reason. Not getting any peat at all. Red currants, black currants, icing sugar. Then I repeated heavy fruit cake, glazed fruit. So you can see, if you're familiar with a Bunnahabhain 12, you'll know exactly what I mean. This is a real Christmas dessert type nose on it. And then on the palate, this is not for the occasional drinker. And I put 4 exclamation marks. Sweet and very savoury. A lot of sherry dry. Barbadillo sherry dry. Lots of tannin. Yeah, that was probably where the warning sign went. Some vanilla. It calmed down very quickly, but it feels much higher proof than it actually is. At least 50%. Probably the most challenging whiskey I've had in a long time that's not been cask strength. Oh. So now what I did with it was I was so perturbed by it. I had a Oliver Melanio Grand Reserva cigar with it, and that really calmed it down, really chilled it out. I mean, the Melanio is a fantastic smoke. It is probably my favorite alongside Davidoff Late Hour. And you will find that cigars are going to fundamentally change how a whiskey feels to you. So my conclusion was, and not 18, it's going to be a whiskey unlike anything you've had before. Water made it somewhat sweeter. The sherry and the tannin receded. And then after a couple of minutes, it just dropped off a cliff edge. White pepper became more apparent. And at the end, the whiskey was extremely flat. So there you go. Yeah, I tried it with water and it just did not work. So that was about 3 months ago. So there we go. So it's been sat in the glass for about 15 minutes. Golden rule, minute in the glass for every year in the cask. So if a whiskey's 12 years old, leave it in the glass for 12 minutes. Tip the glass over if you're using a Glencairn. Turn it slowly, right? It's not showmanship. What it does is it just coats the inside of a glass and it will give you just a little bit more on the nose. And then, yeah, pretty much the same. So lots of vanilla, icing sugar, dark fruit. If you bury your nose in the glass, you are going to get a bit of ethanol. So just be aware of that. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's cakey. Yeah, maybe. It's definitely not part-baked bread. If there's the malt funk in there is pretty much disappeared. So I say more fruit cake again. So the nose really isn't changing that much. It's a good nose. There's nothing wrong with this. It's a very seasonal whiskey, but yeah, still like the nose. So on the palate, much gentler. Syrupy, a little bit sharp, dry, vanilla, no pepper at all. I think the sherry is more pronounced, but it's really sweet sherry, like a cooking sherry or something. Yeah, that's much better. But again, it tastes more than 46%. For me, this tastes like cask proof, but that bitterness has disappeared from it. Those tannins have disappeared. Yeah, much better. Much better. I would have to sit with it for sort of half an hour or something, but there's a lot going on the nose, a lot going on in the glass, and none of it's unpleasant. Yeah, this is a different drum. But of course, it could have been me that night. You just don't know, which is why it's always worth going back to a whiskey if you don't get on with it and just trying it again. But I'll have this with what do you got? I've got a Brickhouse Maduro clip ready to go, so I think that's probably going to really set it off, really calm it down even further, and then we'll see how that goes.
What other than maybe you being in a different mood or environment, or your palate is more neutral or something this time around, what else could change that? Is it the amount of time it sat? Is it the amount of time it was in its glass?
A bad glass that's not been cleaned properly.
Mhm.
I mean, Daniel Whittington tells a story where he ordered a glass of peated whiskey, and someone had not cleaned the glass properly, and then held what's that fucking awful thing that you like? Cinnamon
I
whiskey.
don't like it. I just drink it Fireball.
Fireball. Yes, someone put an extremely expensive single into a glass that had held Fireball. So you know that can affect you. Are you recovering from a cold or an illness? Obviously, COVID. I was quite lucky. But the couple of times I had COVID, I didn't have any palate or sense of smell effects at all. In fact, I recall the second time I had COVID, I thought, you know what? Once I'd done the test, I thought I'm going to feel fucking awful in the morning. I might as well just do it properly. And I sat down here in the conservatory, got absolutely smashed on whiskey. And I think the hangover was so bad for the next 2 days, I didn't even notice I had COVID. I was absolutely hanging out my ass for 48 hours. So that seemed to work. But, you know, that can work. Recovering from an illness, you can get bad bottling, all sorts of things. And again, yeah, you know, why would you have a glass of something really expensive in a restaurant? You know, if you're going to do this, if you really appreciate it, for me, it's if you want to appreciate something that maybe 50 people have dedicated 12, 15, 18, 21, 24 years of their life, their working life to, give it due deference, give it a moment, quiet moment where you can sit and enjoy it with someone important here, or just on your own, where you can sit and appreciate it. For all other times, just drink cheap stuff. You know, I'm gonna be out next weekend. You know, with a couple of lads, and they're both massive whiskey fans. We are not going to be drinking Macallan and Bowmore. We're fucking not. If we have whiskey at all, it's going to be Jameson or something like that, because that's what the moment calls for. You know, don't waste your money.
Like you said in the beginning, it's an art form. And if you think about it like that and you approach it like that, you know, you may have a different experience with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a time and a place for a Pizza Hut, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know, it's not the meal that you take a first date out on, unless she's going to be a really cheap date. But yeah, you know, but it's got its place. So cheap whiskey has its place. Expensive whiskey has its place. It's just identifying where that place is going to be. How cheap whiskey will survive, or rather how a really expensive whiskey is going to survive what's coming in the next 12, 18, 24 months. Well, a real shame about, as I said, Waterford Distillery. I've got a bottle of Waterford, absolutely phenomenal. I fully buy into the terroir thing. However, there was a marketing disaster when someone very senior said, well, barrels don't matter as much as where the grain comes from. Mate, what are you doing? And it's a big operation, really big operation. So you've got an awful lot of whiskey sat there. I haven't checked what's happening with that. It would be a crying shame to see them go under. And then on the flip side, you've got Jameson's who just excel at producing pretty good, reasonably priced whiskey, accessible. So, you know, whereas the cheapest bottle of Waterford might be 60 quid, you can get a phenomenal bottle of Jameson's stout cask for under 25 quid. You know, the crested is fantastic. The black bowl is fantastic. Snobs are going to turn their nose up at it, but for 25 quid, what you're getting is a very decent bottle there. And then they've got their little micro distillery, Method of Madness, within the organization, who are doing phenomenal investigative work using casks other than oak. Because over in Ireland, it's not like Scotland. Over in Ireland, you can use all kinds of wood. So they're playing around with cherry wood. I haven't tried it yet. It's a little bit expensive. You know, how are these distilleries all going to cope though with an economic downturn and people having less coin in their pocket? Is that going to be offset by the fact that less coin means people won't be going out as much, pubs, etc.? Will they be drinking more at home, or are people just going to stop drinking? as much, full stop. Well, I mean, Ralphie reckons that for the younger generations, drinking isn't as much a thing now. They're just not spending the coin, because to go out now, you need 100 and... Well, I'll report back next Saturday when we go out for an afternoon. But I suspect I'm going to do 100 quid in 5 hours. Easy. That's what, 130, $140. Kids don't have that money, do they?
No, no, they don't. I will be interested to know. So you'll have to report back.
Well, the last time it was supposed to be 5 hours in the afternoon, and it finished at 1 a.m. We had to be collected from a curbside.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, fantastic night that was. There might have been karaoke as well.
Oh yeah, Taylor Swift, right? You were singing
Yeah,
Taylor
it's all the
Swift.
haze.
Okay, we're gonna finish up here, and I just have a couple of questions. So, first of all, I want to know. Well, let me tell you about me for a second. Until you, I didn't think that I liked whiskey, and I think that that's partly because the only whiskey that I had ever really interacted with was Irish whiskey. And so if you had asked me, just a few years ago, I would say, no, gross, hate it. I don't want it. Um, and then, dealing with you, I've been introduced to different whiskeys, different concepts, different flavors, blah, blah, blah. And now I think I might like it, or at least I like what do you like. So do you have advice for a beginner as to how to get a balanced introduction to drinking whiskey?
So, know your palate first. If you've got a sweet palate or a savory palate, pick a blend or two blends that are going to be affordable. If you can stretch, pick three. So what I would do is, I'm bearing in mind, right? If this doesn't work, you might end up with a 20-25 quid bottle of something that's going to go in fizzy drink, right? So it's not the end of the world. But you're still going to get smashed on it at some stage. So, you're not going to pour it down the sink. So I would go Buffalo Trace for the bourbon, and that's going to appeal to the sweet palate, right? And it's just a dependable bourbon. Shackleton blend, because that's slightly savory. It's got a really interesting backstory to it. It tends to be reasonably priced, and there's good continuity in quality. I think I've had about 3 or 4 bottles. I've not had a bad bottle. It's just been a good, dependable, easy drinker. Stay clear of peated, right? Don't go near that shit. You ain't ready for it. You seriously not. And then go for Jameson's, but don't go for the just as bog standard Jameson's. It's a bit lackluster, in my opinion. It's all right, it's always a mixer, but that's about it. Go for the Black Bowl, which you'll probably be able to get on offer for about 25, or the Crested. All right, now try all 3 of those. Take your time with it. Just sit somewhere quiet, in the conservatory, in the garden, in the man cave, whatever, with a bit of paper and pen, and then at the end of it, come to a conclusion of which one that you like. And then once you've picked one, or once you decide all 3 are good, once you've finished them, don't start collecting already. Finish them first, and then you'll be ready to move on. So if I wanted to move on from Buffalo Trace, next I would go for Bullet or our good friend Mellow Corn, which Americans are going to be rolling their eyes at, but it's a phenomenal whiskey. It's just a great whiskey. It's 30, 35 quid. I've seen it even for 40 quid over here. Bold in bond, 50%. It's just phenomenal. It's got a great flavor profile. Shackleton, if you enjoy Shackleton and you like that blend, go for something from Aaron, I'd say. Even a 10 is only 35 quid. It's a steal at the moment. I really like them because they kept their prices consistent through COVID. There wasn't really any obvious profiteering. Aaron 10 would be the next leap. And then Irish whiskey from Jameson. If you like the Crested or the Black Bowl, Yeah, you see, Jameson's a bit Irish whiskey is a bit difficult because for me, the logical leap from there would be Redbreast. But then you're talking about a jump of about 50, 55 quid. And yeah, I know there are other Irish whiskies there which kind of they're in between sort of the 40, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. Tullamore Dew I really enjoyed, but I think that's more of a that's more of a sort of baseline whiskey, but it was very good. Powers, very good. I had a Powers which was done in a wine cask or a sherry cask, and that was excellent. Oh, you. But yeah, maybe jump towards that. The same as rum. If you want to try rum for the first time, go to Pussers. Just bog standard. If you get a taste for that, jump to Woods. 50%, excellent. About as close to the Royal Navy top as you'll get. I mean, if you enjoy that, maybe go to Black Tot or something. But the thing is to buy a bottle and spend a bit of time with it. Get to know it, get to understand it. Remember that first sip, right, it's going to kill you because alcohol is a poison. So when you have your first sip of whiskey, unless you've got a problem, right, your body's going to go, what the fuck? What are you putting inside me here, mate? So it's going to take a 2, 3 sips. Take your time over it. Swallow it round in the mouth. Think about what's going on. Relax. And don't for a minute think that it's some kind of snobby drink that only classy people not that, because I absolutely promise you there are a lot of people out there with a lot of money who wouldn't recognize a good whiskey from donkey piss, to be honest with you. Right? It's all subjective. We've all got the same taste buds to one degree or another. It's our ability to understand what's going on, understand flavor, understand aromas that makes you a bit of a bit of an expert in these kind of things.
For our more experienced whiskey enthusiasts, do you have one or two recommendations, something that they have to try?
Bunnahabhain 12 cask strength, absolutely superb. Anything from Signatory, the independent bottlers, the Deanston and the Edgedour, absolutely fantastic. Signatory are just banging out phenomenal stuff at the minute. The 100 proof range, I think they're going for about anything between 45 and 55 quid. I don't see how they're going to be able to keep that up. Snap them up, get it while you can, kids. They're an absolute steal. What would I stash up on? I mean, being in the UK, if you're still buying bourbon, I've stopped on principle, but if I would start stashing up on higher end bourbons. Wild Turkey Rare Breed is my pick. Anything from Balcones, absolutely outstanding Texas bourbons. Irish whiskey, I don't tend, don't. I mean, I keep seeing Redbreast, and I keep thinking I really enjoyed that Redbreast 12, and then I see the 15 occasionally. I've never really gone back to it for some reason. I don't know why. Really high end stuff. No, I don't know. I mean, I had that Will Brackler 24. It's okay, not amazing. Certainly not worth 250 quid. It was nice, but it it didn't knock my socks off any stretch of the imagination. I would go for the Deanston. Try the Deanston 12. If you enjoy that, go for the Deanston 18. Bunnahabhain 12. Go for the Bunnahabhain 18. Similarly, go for the Arran 18. I think 18-year-old whiskies are just going to become unaffordable. Probably the way things are going. I hope I'm wrong, but I can see them kind of going over the 100 quid mark and then being unaffordable for me. I don't want to spend over 100 quid on a bottle of whiskey. If there's something I really fancy, occasionally I go to Gibraltar and I can get kind of 50% off easily there. So that's when I spend more than that. Keep an eye out on the rum scene as well. Some great deals to be had on rum at the moment. And I think a few people are moving towards tequila, mezcal, that kind of thing. Not for me. One bad experience, tequila. I've never had mezcal. You ever had mezcal?
Yeah, of course.
No, I've never had it. I've got no reference point for it. Is it like savory or sweet or?
No, it's real smoky.
Oh, I might quite like that, man. What, do you have it neat or?
It depends. Like, uh, right before the bar closed down, because of COVID, we had purchased like a lot of, I think we bought, like, we had the whole supply in the state of Connecticut of a really fancy mezcal. So then the bar closed. So we had a lot of that to drink over COVID. And that you would just drink neat other stuff. I mean, they make like fancy mezcal cocktails and stuff that I'll order sometimes, but
I
most
see.
of
I
it,
can't be arsed with cocktails. It's a lot of
yeah,
faff, isn't it?
a lot of
I mean,
work.
my mate Nibs does exceptional cocktails, but he's in the kitchen and he's there for like 15 minutes, and
Yeah,
he
you'll have
juices
details at
this
home.
thing and it's beautiful. I mean, it looks stunning, and he'll hand the glasses over to us, and he'll turn his back to get another two glasses for him and his missus, and he'll turn around and I'm like shaking my glass at him empty. It was nice, but
Yeah,
I've done
I
that, mate.
don't make them at home, but if I go, if I'm out for dinner or something, I'll order a cocktail sometimes. Yeah, and it's worth trying. I think you probably would like a mezcal, but um, just be careful.
Why? Does it something about it?
Well, it sounds like your tequila experience was a little rambunctious, so just don't go crazy.
Well, yeah, but I think I'll be all right here. There's no Singaporean pole dancing clubs, and there's no Brannigans, and
You don't know where you
there's no highly amusing Chinese Elvis tribute band as well, which
you
I think I'm right.
you might be inclined to go and find that though.
I've never, I've never seen a Chinese tribute band to Elvis. Absolutely fantastic.
No.
In the ghetto, in the ghetto is just something. Yeah. There used to be a floating restaurant in Hong Kong. I never went to Hong Kong, but apparently every Sunday they had a Chinese Elvis tribute band there, and it was supposed to be quite astounding.
I can only imagine.
Any other
Um,
questions?
I don't think so, unless there's anything else you want to say or teach us.
Um, no, I don't think so. No, I think we've accurately covered that. If anyone's got any questions, message us at Shipwreck Pod, and we'll try and get an answer for you. But like I say, just think about what you're buying, and remember that if you go to a restaurant, you can spend 35 quid on a bottle of wine, and you'll destroy that inside of, like, if you like us, 30 minutes. And then it's gone. A really good bottle of whiskey, 35 quid, will last you a good few weeks. If you're a smoker as well, really, really get into it and try pairing cigars and whiskey, or cigars and rum. But it does work. Do your research, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you want a bit of advice, give us a shout, and we'll point you in the right direction. I mean, I've got you drinking mellow corn now, haven't I? So, we're on the way.
Like I said, I would not have given whiskey a real chance. I think it's mostly because we owned an Irish pub. There's a lot of Jameson. There's a lot of just shot taking, and that's just not how I like to do things. And so I do think if you are someone like me, who that's been your experience, there is another way, and there are more there's more flavors out there. There's different brands that really do make a difference. So, yeah, give it a chance if you have and you've written it off.
Yeah, just get yourself a bottle of something one evening, and just sit there, nice music on. As I say, what's the worst? What's the worst that's going to happen? If you blow $30 or whatever, and you think it's absolutely gash, then you've got an expensive mixer for Coke. Oh. Still going to get drunk. He's still going to wake up absolutely hammered the next morning. So it's not a complete loss, is it? But it might sort of open your mind a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. All right, thank you for doing this.
Shall we just remind everyone what's coming up?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so soon we'll be recording a big episode. I think I'm right in saying this is probably going to be our biggest, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about the Battle of San Carlos Water, which was the amphibious landings and the subsequent Argentinian air raids on the beachhead during the recovery of the Falkland Islands in 1982. We've got a Falklands historian, renowned Falklands historian. We've got a couple of subject matter experts in Argentine aviation, including a former guest, Hopsy, who hopefully you would have listened to on a previous podcast. And of course, there's going to be Tim, who absolutely promises to stay awake this time, even though he will probably be drinking. Going to go to sleep like he did last time on Lefroy, and me. And we're going to do a real in-depth look at Argentine Air Force tactics, the loss of HMS Arden, HMS Antelope, damage to HMS Antrim, and HMS Argonaut, tactics ashore, what went right, what went wrong, and the whole thing will be overseen by a friend of the podcast and, of course, a host of Letters from Ukraine, David Brookfield. So it's going to be a massive one. On the back of that, we're hoping to fit in a mini episode about the loss of HMS Coventry, because I felt that probably deserved an episode within itself. And yeah, we're going to hope to get that to what, end of the month, end of April?
Hopefully mid-April if we're recording early on. Hopefully by mid-month.
Yeah, and then there might be a few weeks break because obviously you've got some work commitments, and the male pole dancing season at holiday camps is really taking off. So I might be off the air for a few weeks as I might trade. And yeah, that's what's coming up, and it's going to be a good one. The amount of effort, the amount of work that goes into these is usually big. The boys have really gone at it, haven't they? On this one, been an awful lot of research. It's going to be, I think it's going to be the most comprehensive examination of the 4-day battle that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree. There's been a lot of hard work going on behind the scenes for this one, so hopefully everybody's excited to tune into that, and we'll update you more as we get closer to its release.
Right then.